Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank 1 minute at a time. I am your co-host, Hugh.
And I'm your other co-host, Dev. And on today's show, we're going to be looking at minute 62 as they continue to have a increasingly intense conversation between Grocer and Blank in the diner in Grosse Pointe, Michigan.
And for the second episode this week, we have our guest, Dr. Rayna Denison. Hello, Rayna.
Hi, everyone. I am so happy to be here. Love this movie, and I love this moment in this movie.
Indeed. You were just saying before we started recording that this is the date night movie in your household with your husband, which I think is interesting because this is Dev's favorite movie of all time, but I've never heard him mention it in the dating context. So I wonder
I'm
when...
not going to lie, that there has always been a test of relationship status on how much they like or dislike this movie, but it's not a very good one because everybody loves this movie. So
it's that line Tarantino used to have in his early days when someone interviewed him and they said when he's talking about Rio Bravo and he goes, if I'm getting serious about a girl, I show her Rio Bravo and she better like it, man. It's that movie geek thing of this is the yardstick, you know?
Yeah.
And it works both ways. Kim had a list of things that I had to either watch or play when we started going out. So she had 3 things, and it was Full Metal Alchemist I had to watch. And,
Great.
Yes, and it was. And I had to play original Final Fantasy from the PlayStation. And I can't remember what the third thing was, but I'm pretty sure we got to it.
Final Fantasy 7, I'm guessing?
7, yeah, sorry, 7.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't played 7. I'd played 6 and 8, funnily enough. So, yeah. So this is definitely a film that is a relationship, a make or break film for some, I think. I think it's about high standards.
Well, I mean, and that's what this movie is mashing up, isn't it? It's mashing up romantic comedies of the, John Hughes era, and or it's kind of taking us through the action movie world that, never usually has that element. I mean, of course it does, but that's the point, isn't it? It's a mashup of 2 beautiful sets of genres that should not be put together, but of course work beautifully together.
Yeah, and then you can throw in the high school comedy as well,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's there as well. And I think the other thing that I was thinking about this in the last episode, I was trying to remember because what you were saying, what both of you were saying about Grocer and Blank and their relationship as killers. I was trying to remember the last time before Grosse Pointe Blank that I saw an action film in which killers teamed up, because of course the buddy trope was very big post Lethal Weapon, but there were a few examples before that, and the only one I can think of is Bestseller with Brian Dennehy and James Wood, directed by the late great John Flynn. And the reason that was a low budget 80s thriller that blew up on VHS was because much like this film, it's small scale, it's shot on location, it's very well scripted. It's about the humorous dialogue between 2 characters who are similar but don't like each other. One's a cop, which is obviously Brian Dennehy, because he always played cops, and the other one is James Wood playing an assassin. And James Wood comes to him and says, "You've become because the cop retires, writes books, starts becoming a novelist, and the assassin turns up on his door and says, I want you to ghostwrite my autobiography. But in order to do that, we need to go around and do some investigations, and then people start trying to kill them because they know he's going to write this book and it'll be a tell-all." And that's the closest thing I can think of to this film. It's about 10, 12 years earlier, and yet it's nothing like this film. The humor is not the same. The stylization of it is not the same. Woods' portrayal is very similar. He's dressed almost identically to Martin Blank, but there is none of this. It's Woods and Dennehy. There's super macho guys. There's none of the feelings. There's none of the medication. There's none of the conversation that these 2 are having here. If anything, the dialogue we're about to see is about as close as you get to that old school, male camaraderie, semi-homoerotic bonding thing that is so traditional of American action films, and Hong Kong action films. I mean, everyone talks about Danny Lee and Chow Yun-fat, in The Killer, and here there is this sense that the romantic comedy is in combat. It's in parallel combat with the demands of the action genre. And that whereas in all those films it's bros before hoes, to use a modern expression. In this film it's very much, well, actually he doesn't want to stay in the male world. He wants to go to the more normal side, the more regular Joe side, but perhaps also is that the more feminine side of American society, perhaps in terms of domesticity or potential domesticity. I don't know. I mean, it's a bit more. It's because it's Gen X. It's a bit more diffuse than that. But I feel like there's something there because these two is every time Grocer's talking to Blank, I feel like it swings between father son, older brother younger brother, and potential love interest.
I mean, isn't that interesting? Because you've got that stuff with like the outlaw Josie Wales and other kind of Western movies where the person who comes in and solves those problems is seen to be the person who cannot stay
Yes,
and has to be someone who moves on and leaves. And so, of course,
exactly.
here we have the person who left trying to return to what we all consider normal,
Yep,
I suppose.
yep,
So, yeah, that's a great observation, I think, about what the Blank character is trying to do here
yeah,
in moving from one world back into another.
yeah,
And so is trying to shift genres, trying to shift jobs, trying to shift lives
yeah, yeah.
in a
And
way that should not be possible for him.
exactly,
Yep.
and in the end, when by the time, obviously we'll get to the end when we get to the end with the podcast, but this is that kind of film where we're still not sure. I'm not sure that it ever does resolve that tension. I think that's
Mm-mm.
the entire point of the film.
And I
Yeah.
think that not just the lack of resolution, but also the fact that it's playing so much on that trying to reclaim a lost time plays so much to like old world English literature. I think
Mm.
Evelyn Waugh and Brideshead Revisited, and
Mhm.
like
Mm,
it's. I think that might be one of the reasons why it plays so well in the UK and it has such an appeal to those
yeah,
of us that grew up in the UK. Is it
yeah.
has that sense of everything is slightly in decline, everything things have been lost that can't come back. Um, that I do definitely feel.
Dev, I know there's because obviously you and I have talked films a lot over the years, just as Rayna and I have. But I think I also know that you and I both have certain blank spots. Have you ever seen a British 1950s thriller called The League of Gentlemen?
I've not, no.
Okay, so Basil Dearden, who would do a lot of Ealing comedies, but
Okay.
this one is a serious thriller with comic overtones. But what the reason it comes to mind when you say this is because it's about demobbed soldiers in London after the war who cannot get their lives together. They can't get jobs working. They can't hold down jobs, and so one of the officers gathers his men together when they were his men and says, "We're going to rob a bank." And so they plan a heist together and execute a heist because he's like, we're the military. We know how to do this. You know where to get the guns. I know how, you know how to do the tactics. We're going to do this. And the whole thing is about, it all builds up to the heist and then how the heist works, which is still incredibly well shot for a 1950s action scene. And also the cop trying to stop them. And it's brilliant. It's brilliant because it's all about post-war. It's all about veterans. It's all about, you get the guys who are suffering what to them is still shell shock, and even
Yeah.
though it's World War II, but they're still like they don't have quite the terminology we have, and you've got the people who don't know how to hold down relationships because of what they went through in the war and all this stuff, and it's all in this one compact film, that people don't talk about enough in Dearden's filmography.
Yeah.
And again, when you make that British reference, I think yes, you're right. I think we have a history in British film and books and even poetry, of
Yeah.
post-war
Yep.
trying to attempt to reconcile yourself with if you survive the war,
Yep.
what are you coming home to?
Yep.
And actually, that's this again. That's why it's interesting that this film sits in. By this point, we've already been through and finished the cycle of American Vietnam war
Hmm.
films, action
Yeah.
films, and we still have heroes who are Vietnam vets. But actually, Gulf War One is such a different war, and so much of it is televised as well that we see we all get to see as civilians a different war. And so this film comes after that, and so this has to be different in the way it addresses those veterans issues. It's got to be different,
Yep.
and yet in other ways we can see the parallels.
And I love the fact that in some ways, in this sequence, it plays out those issues of coming back and of different ways of seeing the world come through the diner itself and come through the food and come through the approaches to medicine and come through that very conversation and the way these two characters have very different ways of approaching the world,
Mm, mm.
despite doing the same job.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, certainly because Martin's dressed here more like Grocer, they look like they're more similar. But actually,
Mhm.
the moment they order their food, they're
Yeah,
not the same generation at all.
yeah, absolutely.
Because Martin's order is so health conscious. I mean,
Yeah,
I mean,
you're
they're
in
the
the
exact opposite, right? Because
yeah,
yeah,
Grocer is literally wanting the waitress to get rid of the scrape off the milky white stuff,
yeah.
right? Whereas that is literally the only part of the meal that Blank is after, is the egg white omelet. That's not technically an
yeah.
omelet.
The diner scenes, Rayna, to this day, I cannot watch any diner scene in American films and not remember you telling me about your experience, because we're both diabetics. You're a type 1, I'm a
Oh,
type 2.
yeah.
But your experience was it Albuquerque? Where was
Oh, yeah,
where
yeah.
you went to a conference and you said to me afterwards, you said the biggest problem as a diabetic was that the healthiest thing on the breakfast menu was the breakfast burrito.
I mean, this is such an interesting thing, isn't it? The point of what they're ordering is that it is so individual to each
Yes.
of them. And it tells you everything about how they approach the world. So you have you have Grocer's order, which is just kind of throw everything in, have all the kind of things that you shouldn't eat on the plate and worry about it through medication later, right? But then you have Martin's, who's trying desperately to kind of go, I just want the protein, and I like the whole
That's
thing
the
of the
line.
whole, yeah.
I love that
It
line. Like,
stayed with me, that whole thing about the way he orders food stayed with me afterwards, and like it's an egg white omelet. But we get that refrain coming through in movie after this. That egg white omelet joke comes back
yes.
in movie
Yeah.
after movie after this one, because it works so
Yes.
beautifully to set
Yeah.
up who his character is and how he approaches life, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Very much so. I mean, there's even even in the Bourne films, it ends up. I think
Mhm.
it's the third Bourne film where the CIA man in question is at a restaurant and says, "Oh, I'll have the heart healthy omelet."
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, what does that mean? And I had to look it up, and I was like, "Oh,
It's an
right,
egg white omelet, right?
yeah,
It's the one that
exactly."
has no cholesterol in it
Yeah, but
or
then he orders
removed.
something on the side that ruins it, and I was like, "There
Yeah.
you go. He's the old school." Yeah, that is something about American filmmaking and the use of the diner is it's a character thing.
Mhm.
For me, the kind of sort of reductio ad absurdum of this is when Lee Child, who's a British writer originally, in one of his in the Reacher book that has just been adapted for Amazon, Bad Luck and Trouble. He has Reacher and his 4 ex special investigators in the military. They go into a diner, and in the book, right, every time he reaches this is like book 7 or 9, I can't remember which. So every time you read a Reacher book, if he ends up in a diner, it just says he had eggs and coffee.
Mhm.
It just says he had eggs. It doesn't say what kind of eggs, right? Just he had eggs. Now there's more characters, so you'd think Child would go, "Oh yeah, they're gonna have different kinds of eggs." And he just goes, "They had eggs." And I was like, "This is where we're at now." Like it just doesn't matter. What matters is the violence. Each of these people will be defined by the way they commit violence, not by how they eat. Like, we've got to that point now. It doesn't matter. But for so many decades, it's like this is just like how you do movies, right? This is the movie shorthand. How do we explain someone? We show you how they're dressed, we show you how they respond to certain
Mhm.
situations, and we show you how they order food.
I
You
mean,
know?
we've also talked in the past about the opposite extreme, right? The James Bond esque, citing every brand you can
Oh,
because it's all about that,
Yeah.
and then you've got even
vodka
prior to that,
martini,
right?
shaken not stirred.
Mhm.
Serialization of writing where you're literally paying by the word. So of course you're going to explain a cup of tea in a page's worth of detail because you get paid more to do that without actually having to work very hard, and it feels like this is kind of a back and forth in the level of detail and how much detail you want for good immersion without going
Yeah.
too far into it and getting lost in the detail, or going too far out of it and just everything being very superficial and not having meat to it. And I mean, I've said it
Mhm.
before, but it's where I feel like this movie hits the sweet spot is you've got that detail, you've got allusions to things that are not relevant in any way, shape, or form, but they build that world, but they're not distracting from the core story or the core plot of the film.
And I think you can see that almost in the way they make use the two characters, Grocer brings things in with him to hide the fact that he's assassin. So he puts his gun inside a brown paper bag, and he comes into the diner with that. Whereas what we get with Blank is a kind of use of the things around him.
Yeah.
So he makes use of the napkin on the table to cover up his gun, and he makes use of the plate of food that is being brought to him to escape the situation or to make his exit from the situation. So there are
Exit done.
different uses of the stuff that are the props that are around them, and they use absolutely everything in really different ways.
Yeah. And that's very Hong Kong, isn't it? To come
Mm,
back to what you and I were saying, what we were saying in the previous episodes, that's very Hong Kong.
yeah.
Jackie Chan's 80s style is defined. Once he moves from period kung fu into, and even in
Mhm.
those films, he starts this, but once he moves into modern films with police story onwards, and even just before that with the Lucky Stars, it's what's around me. All his fights are built around, and Sammo Hung's choreography to a certain degree as well. It's always about what's in the room. What do
Yeah.
you use?
Yeah.
And the
I mean,
reason,
my friend and I, when we watched Jackie Chan movies, used to joke exactly that. It's all over now. Jackie's got a ladder. It's
yeah,
all over now. Jackie's got a paintbrush. It's all like, yeah,
absolutely, yeah,
yeah, very
stools.
much that. Yeah.
I mean, I always loved the fact that when Brandon Lee started bringing over Hong Kong style to America, which is a good 5 years before Grosse Pointe Blank, in Rapid Fire, there's this, which is shot by director Dwight H. Little, who did loads of American B movie straight to video thrillers, even if they had a cinema on it. He Steven Seagal's, Van Damme's, you name it, he did it all. There's a scene where they obviously had thought about how to do this because it's very much a classic Chicago cop thriller thing. But with Brandon Lee's character on the run, there's a scene where he's in an apartment block, being chased, trying to fight, runs into the kitchen, pulls open a drawer. There's all the cutlery there, and you just know this is it, right? He's going to do it. Except, of course, he also knows you've got to make a joke of it because it's for the American market. And so he starts pulling things out, and then eventually just pulls the entire drawer out and just throws everything
Yeah.
at the person in front of him. And I was like, yeah, there's somebody who understands, the progression of the gag and the attitude. But it's also what makes, for those of us who watch so much Hong Kong stuff, it's what started to make other films from other countries that were about action disappointing
Mhm.
because the lack of creativity, the creativity tended to go into other areas. Like the French, Remy Julien, they had the car chase down. The Italians in the 70s had the car chase down. Gunfights. The Americans, once you get Walter Hill experimenting with like sound effects on 48 Hours and like the use of
Mm.
like Peckinpah slow motion, but bringing it into a more commercialized vein. The gunfight part remains the American thing. It's all about machine guns and ammunition and how much you expend and things you blow up. And in Britain, it's more about the actors and the intensity of the threat, and then the violence is over quickly. And I feel like what Hong Kong did was it upped the ante by saying, "What about the environment where your character's in? This isn't just about the script. This isn't just about what's on the page. This isn't just about the second unit and what they can film. It is also about what happens right there in the moment because it defines character."
Mhm.
And I think that's always the thing. You talk to people who love action and who think about action like we do, and the thing that Grosse Pointe Blank gets is that action is character.
Yeah.
The food is character, but
Yeah,
it's also the
yeah.
gun.
And I think you're right. And I think that you see reflected in later movies as well. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang uses a lot of these same refrains, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
And
that's from Shane
another
Black.
great movie. Yeah.
It is, yeah. And of course, that Shane Black is at this time of Grosse Pointe Blank is busy, writing and he's getting big paychecks for like Longest Good Night and
Mhm.
Last Boy Scout and all of which are films I love, but which are clearly part and parcel of what Grosse Pointe Blank is parodying.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is more like Grosse Pointe Blank, and it makes me wonder. Well, to be fair, I've read most of his draft scripts, and I think a lot of his action films were more like this. I think what all of his like Lethal Weapon onwards, most of his scripts are filmed by directors who want to cut to the action, and
Mm.
so the humor gets
Well, yeah.
downplayed, and the kind of the what we Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is the first like really pure Shane Black experience. Do you know what I mean? He writes it,
Mhm.
he directs it. He's got a low budget. He can't afford to do loads of action. It's got to be about characters and dialogue. But that comes after Grosse Pointe Blank. Grosse Pointe Blank gets there first in certain ways.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
But isn't that interesting? Because of course the director here is someone who came up with Roger Corman,
Exactly.
so knows all about making great movies on low budgets.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. This
and
is
is you know,
that's
an expert at that
yeah.
almost. You know,
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, you know, I find it really fascinating that over the course of his career, you see a director who starts off. I mean, you know, this film was made in the '90s, and this guy's been directing or producing or acting or even script doctoring, you know, since the end of the '60s.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
he's from the old school. He's around when New Hollywood happens. So I think you're
yeah. Oh
absolutely
no,
right, right?
this is he's someone who comes up like alongside Peter Bogdanovich in ways,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
From that
right.
period.
And I think that's what makes his work in the '90s, first Miami Blues and then this, I think that's
Mhm,
what makes it so interesting, is he's got a
mhm,
real old school grounding. And when we were saying in a previous episode that nobody makes films like this anymore, part of the reason nobody makes films like this anymore is because these guys are all reaching a certain age and a time, and you know,
yeah,
I mean, Friedkin went the other year, and you know,
mm,
we're starting to tick them off, and sadly, and they're going, and we're getting our last commentaries and our last interviews with them, and we're only and only now are some people starting to recognize what the sheer talent these people had, you know.
Yeah.
yeah.
There is one moment at the end of this minute that I want to speak to specifically, which is
Oh yes.
um, this olive branch that Blank extends of you know, he feels like they've started to develop this bit of this rapport, and it's a little bit antagonistic, but ultimately it's not completely tense. And he's like, why don't we just have some breakfast? And Grocer immediately smacks it down. But what I find hilarious about this is that Martin, I think, is so used to getting his way, he completely
Mm.
fails to see that outcome coming, and really has to scramble
Mm.
for his gun, because he's just
Mhm,
like, you know, he's so sure that he's going to charm Grocer into just, it's going to be tense, it's going to be uncomfortable, but let's just have breakfast, right? Like, let's not do this. And I think that it highlights that um the thing that we've talked about a couple times with Gross's character of he believes that he's the biggest person, he believes he's the boss over the NSA agents, he believes that he is the head of the union, um and he's not willing to compromise on any of these things. He's not
mhm.
willing to pal around with anyone that because he's above that.
Mm. I mean, the dialogue, it is so interesting, isn't it? Because we've gone from
Mm.
macho, you know, one-upmanship, meds, abilities, talking about the dog, and now we are at a point where Martin becomes very much the Gen X guy, and it's about
Yeah,
feelings and emotions, like,
yeah,
and he's trying to be the macho guy. You know, it's lone gunman. You know? I love that
yeah,
nod as well, like a reminder of the conspiracy stuff. You know, and he's
Yeah.
like, it's, you know, bad things happen when you have relationships, which is the lesson of every American thriller to do with assassins ever,
yeah.
and half the French ones.
But
And that's, you
that
know,
is right. You're absolutely right, because this is about Grocer wanting things to be done in a baby boomer way where you go corporate. You kind of become the guy who, okay, well, we can't carry on being individuals and like just individual killers anymore. We've got to come together and corporatize this and commercialize this. And I love that Blank's answer to that is just no. Like, that is no.
yeah,
I'm going to be a lone gunman. I'm going to be like, this is, but he's not. And I love that that's a lie too,
yeah,
because he has Marcella in the background. He has his business. He has his support network and his team. He just doesn't want to
But
go
he's
fully corporate in that way.
yeah, no,
I
he's
do
playing
think it's
that
so interesting.
entrepreneurial kind of illusion, right?
Mhm.
That
yeah,
America
Mhm.
has so much of.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. The
That's
illusion
such
of
a good
solitude.
observation, yeah.
The film's just, it's one of the things that makes it work so well. And I also like your point about the fact that he says, let's just have breakfast, you know, break fast,
Yeah,
you know, the ancient tradition of breaking fast together. This is where we, you
yeah.
know, we become friends. And as you say, I mean, the other thing I like about Aykroyd in this moment is because you said in a previous episode, Rayna, that there's a point in the scene where with their acting physically as they push towards the wall,
Mm.
this is the moment where Aykroyd leans his head against the wall.
Yeah.
But I've realized that at this point it's not about the guns or the security. It's actually about the depression of hearing Martin talk and say the things he's saying. And I can't work out if if Aykroyd's playing Grocer as simply disappointed, or disappointed specifically because of the reasonings that Martin's using. But either way, he's disappointed.
Yeah, either
Because,
way.
because Martin says, if you want that sort of thing, he says, become a cop.
Yeah.
He says, join the force and have coffee with them. Just like, and that's also a nod back to the moment shortly earlier in the conversation where he's accused him of being a traitor for and sicking the government agents on him, the NSA guys. And the way Gross goes, I would. What was it? What was he said? Def go
Me,
G.
go G on you, never.
Yeah.
I love that whole. You can almost feel the improv happening in that sequence, but I do wonder if it. I mean, do you know, Hugh, how much of that was in the original script?
Right. So we managed to dig out a copy. We did some online searching. We found the copy of the fourth draft, which is not quite the shooting draft, but it is it's close to the shooting draft. It's this is after the initial writer has written it, and after Cusack and his buddies who are the producers, and one of them
Pink,
is
yeah.
who plays
becomes a director, and
and
he's in the movie as well.
Yeah, he's the guy. He's the rent a cop. Yeah. So
Yeah.
they at this point they've rewritten it, and this is very much it's the speech about Martin's speech about not wanting to join the union, lone gunman, everything from fresh look at our relationship through to let's put it away, our guns away, and Grocer losing it. That's all in the script. But what's not in the script, because that goes almost immediately from the dialogue with the waitress, and they leave everything. There's the line about protein's not there. They leave,
Interesting.
the waitress, that whole dialogue, it just ends with Martin going, nothing in the omelet, nothing at all, and then she leaves. They haven't thought about. And again, that's the improv thing of having someone right there doing it, and you can see how they went there. And then Grocer says, "Come on, live a little. I'm sorry about the incident yesterday." And Martin says, "No harm, no foul." And Grocer says, "A little misunderstanding about my associates beat. I told them to kill you, and they didn't." So that's what they. That's all. Then they get in, and then Martin goes, "Hard to get good help these days." And that's all they say about the government thing. And then we get to Grocer saying, "Let's have a fresh look at our relationship." So basically, most of what we've been talking about is them.
Yeah,
it's coming out of these two actors across the table, just making it up. It's Aykroyd, old school Aykroyd, it's SNL level Aykroyd. I think.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Yeah, this is what I wanted us to maybe pause and think about a moment. Is that these two actors are coming from very different backgrounds, but at the same time, Dan Aykroyd is known for that SNL style ability to deal with things on the fly and just be really good at improving. And I think you can see that kind of coming forward more and more as this minute goes on, almost.
Yeah, and I think this is also the culmination of the. I mean, I don't know what order they shot the scenes in. But it does feel, at least with the way Aykroyd plays it, like everything he's done in his previous scenes have built up the level of how he's improving, what he's improving. He's got something to work with by this point. And I think the thing that makes me think about the homoerotic element is the way he chooses to insult Martin about the death of the dog, because all of those puns, those alliterative puns, to describe him as a dog killer, all vaguely sound like homophobic slurs of the period.
I hadn't
right?
thought of that.
Like
That's interesting.
the phrase puncher, and if you take out the dog bit, I can vaguely recall students at the university when we were drunk. I can vaguely recall kids at the first school I taught. These things were in the air, but Aykroyd cleverly tweaks that to make it, but the fact that he chooses to say those words makes me think he knows what he's doing. He's adding that little touch of, spice to that relationship of these two guys, and parodying the action movie. Because, of course, he did that in a completely different way in Dragnet, where he parodies the 50s, the original action guy, but he doesn't get to do all the fun stuff, right? Hank's got to do all the fun stuff. Now he's getting to take that guy and now flip it on its head and parody it. And I feel like And there's also that thing that he did with and again, I think I said this on a different episode. It's that thing he also did with his character in Sneakers, where he borrows from his brother, who originally was apparently the original conspiracy theorist, wisecracking nut job. And Aykroyd always said that that's the inspiration for these characters. You know, Ghostbusters is based on that guy. His Sneakers character is based on that guy. There's a little bit of that in Grocer. He's not quite that. He's much more mainstream, but there's just a little bit of, you know, hey, they'll put it in the water soon. You know, hey, we need to do this and that. It's just certain.
Little bit of conspiracy theorist going on there.
Yeah, but also a little bit of boomer prejudice as well.
Yeah.
Because especially his reaction to this, it's like the reaction to the food, the reaction to the drugs. It's all very boomer versus Gen X, isn't it?
Oh, it is. Yeah. Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah.
This was minute 62 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, featuring your hosts, co-writers and co-producers, myself, Dev Sodiger, and Hugh David.
Today's guest all this week is Dr. Rayna Denison. Rayna, where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you online?
Well, that's very kind. Thank you. I'm at the University of Bristol. I'm very easy to find on the university website.
And you can find us on the podcast player that you're listening to, as well as YouTube, X, Spotify, all at Debi Radio, DEBI Radio, as well as our website, debiradio.com. Once more, it's spelt DEBI Radio for the handle for all of those.
And you can talk with us on the Facebook's listeners group, Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't a moment, it was a feeling.